Today, on Energy Contact, breath is life. Get a little breath and you get a little life. Get a lot of breath and you get a lot of life. Stop breathing and you stop living. So control your breath and you will control your life. That's what we're talking about today, so sit back and take a deep breath. It's time for inspiration right now on Energy Contact. Hello, and welcome to Energy Contact. My name is Joseph Willenbrink. Thank you for joining me, and thank you to the production staff here in the studio for helping me get my message out to you. Energy Contact is a series I'm presenting to you as a public service. It's about attaining perfect health, growth, happiness, self-improvement, and realizing your full potential. It's designed to present you a new way of looking at yourself, and a new way of looking at the world around you. We're talking about things that have to do with making an energetic contact with yourself internally and with your environment. There's no difference between the body, the mind, the spirit, the emotion, the intellect, the ego. There's no difference between mass and energy. These things are all exactly the same. There is something about us that just loves to separate, dissect, parse these things out, take one little tiny piece, put it under a microscope, and think we know everything. In fact, all that health and growth and happiness we're looking for take place when we do just the opposite. It happens when we combine, when we put these things together, when we make an energetic contact between the physical world and the unseen one. We're presenting on these programs a brand new paradigm that's thousands of years old. We're presenting extraordinary topics for ordinary people. And let's move right ahead with that. Let's bring up our first slide. Please understand that I am not a doctor. This show is not a medical show, medical advice show, medical talk show, medical anything show. Couldn't be further from it. I call myself an energy healer, a chakra healer, things like that. So might a lot of people. A lot of people might call me lots of things. But state, federal, and local governments call me nothing like that at all. It's important to understand that. There's a lot of important information on your screen right now. Please read all of that, if you will, thoroughly, with your full attention. When you've got it down, now would be a great time to locate a pencil and paper. Now here's why you want to do that. At the end of this show, we're going to run some credits, and on those credits there's going to be contact information for me. Now I invite and encourage you to contact me. I'm sort of hoping that something I have to say to you today might inspire you to want to do that. But in order to contact me, you're going to need that contact information. In order to get it, you're going to need a pencil and paper. There will be plenty of time to jot that stuff down later, if you have your pencil and paper ready. All right? Today is episode number 10 of Energy Contact. And if you're tuning in for the first time today, well, thanks. Thanks and welcome. These shows are sequential. They build. We're talking about things today that we've introduced and defined and explained previously. However, I do my very best to make sure that every program has a lot of value on a standalone basis. So there's some ramp-up stuff, some up-to-speed things, but you'll get plenty out of this show just as it is. And if what you see piques your interest, then I'll invite and encourage you to look around, because there will be earlier programs airing at later times. They'll either be re-airing right here on this station, or they'll be on at different days and times in different areas. And if you look for them, I'll appreciate it. All right, and now it's time for me to introduce my co-host. This is my co-host, Slim, and Slim is here for a reason. Since we're investigating what it is that energy contacts in the physical self, we've got to know a couple of somethings about a couple of somethings, don't we? We have to know something about energy, and this program is all about energy. That's what we're talking about. But all of that energy out there somewhere does us no good. It does us no good at all until we bring it into focus, until we bring it into contact with something. My pal Slim is here to help us understand what that thing is that the energy contacts. Remember, a body without energy is just a corpse. And energy without a body, well, it might be a lot of cool things, but none of them are human. All right, previously on Energy Contact, we have been looking at the body intellect. The body intellect and the anatomy that it builds. We've seen how the same materials in our brains, we always were told they were brain things, the things that give us thought, reason, recall, memory, logic, intellect, intelligence, all those things, we have learned that they are in fact in every cell of our body. They permeate every cell of our body. Way back at the time of our conception, we started out as one cell, and that one cell split into two identical cells, and those split into identical cells. And of those identical pairs, one cell went to our brain, one cell went to our belly. Identical cell, same information, different places. All right, but out here in the bigger world, we've also seen some stuff about bones and muscles. We've seen that bones shape us, and that muscles shape bones, and that they are both shaped by thought, by that body intellect. The relationships between muscles and bones and thought, that's what we've been looking at. How they iterate and interrelate with each other, how they work with each other. One of the things we saw about muscles is they don't know how to push. They only pull and release. That's all they know how to do. And we also saw that bones don't support us, but they do shape us. We observed, in fact, that while our skeleton may give us some shape, it is not the framework that holds us together. In fact, it's we, the rest of us, that hold it together. That's why my buddy Slim here needs bolts and screws, and you don't. We've learned that life, this thing called life, occurs within a series of forces going on. We've got external ones that push and pull us around. We saw gravity and entropy and energy, the bumps and bruises, the kiss and hugs of life. And we've got internal forces that animate us, pulse, frequency, rhythm, vibration, and breath. Through all of this, and in conjunction with that body intellect, we set up all of our strengths and weaknesses. We set ourselves up, and a million different people will respond to the same bump or the same hug in a million different ways. And that brings us to today. Today, we'll see that while we may all build ourselves differently, we've all got to breathe. It's the single most important thing we can do. And we're going to see today that our lungs don't do it. And while we all breathe differently. So today, we're going to look at the muscles and bones that shape and facilitate our breathing, and the thoughts and the body intellect and how they participate in the whole process. So today, we're looking at more anatomy, but we're not learning anatomy the way you learned it in school. We're learning it in an energetic way. Why study anatomy at all? Why look at it all on an alternative healer show? Well, because anatomy is what the energy builds. And anatomy is what the energy contacts. And if we look at it deeply enough, we will find our spirit. Dry anatomy comes alive when it makes energy contact with the body intellect. And today, we'll see that breath is the foundation of it all. All right, so that's where we're headed today. But first, it's time for us to take our break. It's time to take our virtual field trip, our journey in our mind's eye, like we do about this part of every program. And today, we're having an encore performance. We're returning to a previous visualization. Return with me on a walk through my virtual house. We're walking through the hallway, and we come up to a room. And as I open the door, you see it's a long, long empty room. Long like a high school gymnasium. And the room is completely empty, except that on the far side of the room, there are two figures laying down. And I tell you the gruesome news that one of those two people is alive and healthy, and the other one is dead. Your job is to determine which is which, but we're a long distance away, and they're both lying very still, so you can't tell. So we have to move a little closer. And we do. And you still can't tell. We keep moving closer, but you can't tell. We're halfway across the room, and you don't have a clue yet. 3/4 of the way. Almost upon them. But it's not until we get right on them that you start to notice some things. We get right next to these guys, and you notice that one of these persons is completely serene. He's placid, just peaceful and motionless. Sound nice? Well, guess again. That's the dead guy. You look at the other guy, and you see a very subtle rise and fall in his chest. You see frequency and vibration and motion and wavelength. You notice breath. You kneel down and you touch him, and you can feel that subtle rise and fall, maybe a little beat of his heart. And you feel warmth. Hold that thought. We have been looking on Energy Contact at how we build ourselves. And if you've been watching, you are now quite aware that 1 million different people will build themselves in 1 million different ways. And you are aware of the internal and external forces that are working within us and upon us, respectively. Now, in this whole conglomeration, the single most critical, most basic tool that we have in our self-building process is the air that we breathe. The way we build ourselves shapes the way we breathe, and the way we breathe shapes the way we build ourselves. A few episodes, we introduced a cast of characters on Energy Contact. Do you remember those guys? Sort of archetypal body types. We saw a rigid person, a deflated person, a happy person, a depressed person, an angry person, an anxious person. Remember all those guys? We saw something previously about how they build themselves, but let's consider how they breathe. All of these folks breathe, and they all breathe differently, at different levels of health and pathology. If you think about that depressed person, you might wonder how he's going to even muster up enough energy to breathe. It just takes so much effort. On the other hand, the anxious person, everything's just sort of flipping and flopping so quick. How's that person ever going to get a breath? Now let's bring up a slide and we'll take a look at some other people. See these guys? All of them have built themselves differently, and they all breathe differently. Can you see that? 1 million different people will build themselves in 1 million different ways, and they all breathe accordingly. Not only that, but the same one person will breathe differently at different times. You breathe differently at different times of the day. Your breath has a direct correlation to your mood and where you're at and what you're doing. You breathe differently than if you're exercising than you do if you're stressed out, than you do if you're angry, than you do if you're relaxed. And you are usually not aware of it. All right, let's come back up here. So while observing all of these people is a great idea, and I recommend it, what you really want to do is look at yourself. Many of us don't know how we breathe. Either that or we just forget to do it. We take for granted that it happens. We think it's some involuntary thing, like blinking or like heartbeat. So while we all breathe, most of us are not very good at it. If something in us is breathing, if we're breathing, something's doing it. And we determine from the live guy and the dead guy that what that must be, that life is a function of those internal forces that animate us. It's the rhythm, the vibration, the pulse, and the frequency, and the motion and breath. As biological organisms, breath is what makes us alive. That's the bottom line. It's our most absolute basic need. We can live for a long time without food. You hear about people who go on 40-day fasts and such. And you can live for days without water. But we can only live a couple of minutes without breathing. Again, at that strictly biological level, as biological organisms, it doesn't take much to keep us alive, not much at all. We might not have much of a life, but we can stay alive without love, goodness, kindness, shelter, clothing, anything like that. We can even live without a brain. That's that vegetative state that you hear about. Or when you see in the news controversies about unplugging someone who's brain dead. Don't even need a brain to be alive. What you do need is breath and pulse. But even that heartbeat is secondary. And while it's not as automatic as you think that it is, that heartbeat, it's much more so than breathing. Heartbeat's also secondary because it's the heart's job to pump oxygenated blood through our body. So that requires oxygenated blood. What does that? Breath. And, among other things, breath is motion. Nothing that is alive is still. Our heart pumps, our lungs expand and contract, our colon exhibits peristalsis, that's the digestion motion. And if you recall, all motion, all of it, is a function of something in us called mesoderm. Let's quickly review what that mesoderm is. And to do that, we need to return to the womb for a second. you'll recall that just moments after conception, that single-celled being, that zygote that was you, started dividing. And within 3 weeks, that zygote had divided into 3 layers. An internal one, an external one, and a middle one. Every cell in you now comes from one of those 3 layers. Scientists call them ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm. Now please don't let those terms intimidate you. They're just very simple terms. And we're going to explain it all very clearly right now. Ectoderm is the outer layer. It is the cells in our formation that become skin, nails, tooth enamel, mammary glands, the nervous system, and the brain. Ectoderm defines us as something different than our environment. It keeps the outside out and the inside in. It's the shell of the M&M. It's the reason that I'm not melting into this table I'm leaning on. The endoderm, on the other hand, is the innermost layer. It's the cells that will become intestines, liver, pancreas, bladder, trachea, much of the reproductive system, and the lungs. The endoderm converts the external environment into us. This stuff right here, it's last week's broccoli casserole, and it's the endoderm that transformed it. So if the ectoderm is the container, the endoderm is that stuff that must be contained. It's just guts and goo. Without the ectoderm to hold it, it'd just spill out all over the place. But we're slim in that. Well, that brings us to mesoderm, to our 3rd layer, our middle layer. The mesoderm are the cells that become bones, muscles, blood, cartilage, tendons, ligaments, fascia. Later, they separate into some other things, the kidneys, the heart, the gonads, the inner teeth, other little bits and bips here and there. So Slim is all mesoderm. He's 100% mesoderm, but there's plenty of mesoderm that Slim doesn't have, that's not on Slim. Now this mesoderm, this middle layer, has 3 jobs, 3 functions: support, form, and motion. That's all that it does, and it is the only part of us that does it. Nothing in those other 2 layers can move, not at all. Unless, of course, the mesoderm moves it. So what makes life is locomotion, is motion. It's what makes us different than that corpse we just saw. But wait a minute. We just said that breath is what made us different than that corpse we just saw. Now we're getting somewhere. That mesoderm, by providing motion, provides life. It does the bidding of those internal forces that animate us. And, by the way, not only does it make us move and therefore make us alive, it's also the stuff that makes us each look different, that each appear different, one from another. So proper breathing doesn't have much to do with the lungs, does it? Lungs can't move. We breathe properly by having proper mesoderm function: support, form, and motion. And also something else: awareness. So muscles breathe. But remember that muscles can't push. They can only pull and release. Before we understand how muscles move lungs, we have to understand the muscle-bone relationship. And so let's do that. Let's bring up a slide and we'll look at a picture of our tent that we saw last show. Remember that tent there? We're looking at that to see how the mesoderm operates the endoderm. Recall that that tent pole is not the thing that holds up the tent. What holds up the tent is this. It's the left side of the tent that holds up the right side, and it's the right side that holds up the left side. Well, in us, the muscles are like that tarp material. They're the tent, and the bones are that pole. Bones do not support us, but they give us shape, and they're spacers. They provide the fulcrum over which the muscles can pull. On the other side of your screen, you see muscles pulling there. You see them pulling on a stack of bones there in the middle. And that middle bone, excuse me, or stack of them, it's the spine in this case, does what the tent pole is doing. All right, let's come back up here. So, last show, we saw that muscles were just like rubber bands. This show, we're seeing that lungs are sort of like this. They're just like a balloon. As a matter of fact, I've got a little balloon here, and we're going to put that in Slim here if I can get it. And so, lungs work basically like this. You can't really see where it is in there. There you can. And that's where the lungs go in us, but the lungs have no mobility of their own. They can't move. That means that they cannot expand and contract themselves any more than a balloon can inflate itself. Something else has to expand and contract them. Now, most breathing shows have lots of diagrams of lungs, but now that we know that lungs don't breathe, we don't really need to look at any of that other than our balloon here. Let's look at what does move. But first, we need to just notice Slim's pelvis here, because this is going to have something to do. The muscles of breathing are very related to it. So keep that in mind as we move forward. All right, now on to breathing muscles. Let's bring up a slide. What you see on your screen right now is the psoas muscle. It is the deepest muscle in your body. Can you see how it goes along the pelvis there? That's why we looked at that on Slim. Notice the spelling of the word psoas. It's a Greek word. Literally, the psoas implies a group of 3 muscles. This isn't really important. It's just a little something for my fellow geeks out there. Those 3 muscles are the iliacus, the psoas minor, and the psoas major. And that trio is often referred to as the iliopsoas. They all start about the same place there on the top of our legs and branch off as they move up. Now that psoas muscle there does all of the following from the earth up. As you know, on Energy Contact, we always move from the earth up. It does all the following and more. First, it flexes the hip and thigh towards the abdomen, or vice versa, the abdomen towards the hip and thigh. It controls mid-spine position and balance, like you saw on the tent picture. It protects all those tender visceral organs, all that endoderm in there. Can you see how thick and strong that muscle is? Something's got to be pretty tough to get past that. And it even controls our breathing by passing through the diaphragm, passing through the place where the diaphragm attaches to the lumbar spine. And we'll see that in a second. Let's come back up here. That psoas is really, it's the only muscle that connects the bottom of us to the top of us. I'll show you this on my spine muscle here. All of our top muscles tend to go down and attach here to our pelvis and stop. And all of our leg muscles tend to start from down here and they attach here. None of those muscles really go through except the psoas. It goes all the way from here, all the way up to here. So, that's our psoas muscle. It may seem that that psoas muscle is just a physical, just an anatomical thing. But I'm here to tell you, friends, it is just as spiritual as your most honest and heartfelt prayer. And it is just as sacred as divine love. Why? Well, because there's no difference between the body and the spirit. They're the same thing. And your psoas is very much in touch of that, whether the rest of you is aware of it or not. It's a core muscle. In fact, it defines the core. It's a body intellect muscle. That psoas is entire shows by itself. As you'll see, if you keep tuning in, we're going to do a bunch of them. But for now, let's move on to some other muscles. Let's bring up our next slide. This is the diaphragm here. It's another muscle of breath. The diaphragm covers that lower abdomen like an umbrella. Can you see it there? It looks like a mushroom. Up in the corner, that's it by itself. And then you can see it sitting in the ribs there. This is what many people call the breathing muscle. But now we see that it's only one of them. Remember, the lungs themselves, they aren't on this picture. They can't breathe. They can't move. What they can do is respond to the rise and the fall of the diaphragm. When you inhale, what happens is you flop that diaphragm muscle down, and that downward push creates a vacuum in your chest, and your lungs inflate like a balloon. And when you exhale, you pull the diaphragm up, which pressures the lungs, squeezing the air out. That diaphragm also separates the chest from the abdomen. You can see very clear there in that middle picture. By doing that, it keeps the heart and the lungs, the muscles of oxygenation, or the organs, of oxygenation, separate from the viscera, the organs of digestion. That diaphragm has a lot of power, but it is empowered by the psoas. All right, now there's another muscle group we need to look at before we move on, and there it is on your screen right now. These are the intercostal muscles, the muscles of the ribs. They are what you eat when you go out to eat ribs. You eat the intercostal muscles of pigs and cows. Yum. The intercostal muscles are in 2 sets. They're called the external intercostals and the internal ones, for the obvious reasons. The external intercostals manage the expansion of inhaling, and the internal ones manage the contraction of exhaling. So let's come back up here, and maybe I can show you a little bit about how that works. What happens, imagine my fingers as your ribs. When you breathe, what happens is your ribs expand to allow for the lungs to expand. And with those intercostal muscles, they sit in between there and they allow for that expansion, and then they pull back in to help us exhale. Okay, so the most important thing we can do is breathe. Let's see if we can sort of put all of this stuff into a big picture here before we run out of time today. Let's bring up our next slide. This picture here is a little too detailed for us for intents and purposes, but you can see there, if you look carefully, the psoas in the middle of all that mess. Above it, at the very top, you can see that horizontal roof-shaped thing. That is the mushroom-like, umbrella-like diaphragm. And on the bottom are the muscles of the pelvic floor. We looked at them last program. Keep in mind, we're looking at this picture in the context of how we breathe. And how we breathe is determined by thought, by the invisible body intellect. Let's come back up here. So, we want to assemble this, as mentioned, into a big picture. And here's how it works. The goal, the most basic goal of life, is to breathe. But lungs can't move. But they can be moved. But to do that, they depend on muscles. But muscles can't push. They can only pull. And so they depend on bones to provide them something over which to pull and counterpull and release. And they all depend on and are built according to the body intellect, to thought. As long as we can move this invisible, non-physical breath through our physical selves, we're alive. But moments after we stop, even though everything else is exactly the same, we're dead. Remember our live guy and our dead guy? They're both bodies. The live guy is no more a body than the dead guy is, at least not for a little bit. But still, there's something obvious that the live guy obviously has that the dead guy doesn't have. Still, doctors learn about living people by cutting up dead ones. It's possible that they're missing something. But not us. We're not missing a thing. We're doing better things. Breath is life. You get a lot of breath, and you get a lot of life. Get a little breath, and you get a little life. So control your breath, breathe fully, and you will have a full life. And we're going to look at that more next time. But for now, thank you for joining me today. I wish you peace and positive energy and a healthy life in Energy Contact.